We're in a pretty critical time right now for the future of energy in this country, and not only just the future of energy, but really the future of our entire economy as Congress considers a major budget reconciliation bill, which will dramatically impact the future of energy development in this country. I am Doug Lewin, the host of the Energy Capital Podcast. Welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm going to talk through this one as a podcast, but also have this on YouTube. You can find me there, Doug Lewin Energy. There will be some visuals associated with this one, so if you can watch it, that's probably better. But again, I'll talk through it so that if you are listening, you'll be able to do that. So the context for this podcast was a little different than I do things. Usually I interview somebody, but I kind of want to walk you through something that I think is incredibly important. And again, it comes back to the budget bill that was passed just a couple weeks ago in the House and is now in front of the Senate for consideration. And again, it affects not just energy. Often this is reported as what is the future of renewable energy production and development in the United States. But because at this point, the vast majority of power being installed anywhere in the world is renewable, it really is just about energy, and it is about economic growth. So let's dive into all of that. And I'm going to have a couple of different sound clips from a couple of different sources that I want to play for you. But first, just to kind of set the stage here, I want to pull up a quick slide. This is from the recently released Energy Information Agency Clean Investment Tracker. And again, if you're listening, I'm going to describe this because you won't be able to see it. But one of the things that it shows is that global investment in energy is about $3 trillion in 2024, $1 trillion in oil and gas, and $2 trillion in power production, and that includes energy efficiency, renewable energy, grids and storage, and nuclear. And when you put all those things together, it is twice as much as oil and gas at this point. So the world is moving rapidly towards these different forms of energy, and no one is moving there faster than China. So there is also a chart that I'm showing that shows the annual renewable capacity additions globally. And what it shows is that China went from, in 2022, about a little less than 150 gigawatts of renewable capacity additions, all the way to 300. The entire G7 was less than 100. Now, Texas actually rates in this because we put in probably about 7 or 8 gigawatts in 2023. So we were probably about 10% of what the entire G7 put in. But compared to China, it's practically nothing. There was a fascinating article in the Financial Times last month. It's dated May 12th. And it's the first time that I have heard the phrase electrostate. It may have been used other places that I just haven't heard it, but it really kind of stuck with me. And the article from the Financial Times is titled How She Sparked China's Electricity Revolution. And I want to just read 2 paragraphs from it. China is on its way to becoming the world's first electrostate, with a growing share of its energy coming from electricity and an economy increasingly driven by clean technologies. It offers China a strategic buffer from trade decoupling and rising geopolitical tensions with the U.S. The country is not only rapidly advancing towards self-sufficiency in energy from secure domestic sources, but also wields vast power over the markets for the resources and materials that underpin technologies of the future. This is huge. China made a strategic decision roughly 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, that they were not going to be reliant on oil and gas exporters, including the Middle East, Russia, and the United States. They didn't have oil of their own, so what were they going to do? They were going to become an electrostate, not a petrostate like Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Russia to some extent. They're going to be an electrostate, the world's first. This gives them a massive strategic advantage in the 21st century, which the United States desperately needs to keep up with, but may not be able to. And why would we not be able to keep up with that? One reason is because of our own choice. There was an article in Politico recently that I want to pull up here that is titled China's Head Start on Clean Energy is Shaping the Debate on the Republicans' Mega Bill. This is an article that was in Politico a couple of days before the House passed the budget bill. And it says when it comes to winning on clean energy, Trump just isn't interested. They quote a former Department of Energy official in the first Trump administration, Daniel Simmons, as saying, to all appearances, it is not a battlefield that they care about. Now, the case I want to make to you here is that if we don't compete on that battlefield, China will own the 21st century because power production is absolutely key to just about anything you want to do in your economy, including the AI race. If you want to develop artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, you are going to need massive amounts of power. So where is that going to come from? Well, at the beginning of the administration in February, Trump established an Energy Dominance Council. We do not yet have that report. I'm still waiting for it. I'll be one of the first to read it when it comes out. But we have some clues as to what's going to be in there. I want to play for you a clip from Doug Burgum's appearance on the All In podcast. For those of you who listen to the podcast regularly, you'll remember that Glenn Hammer, the president and CEO of Texas Association of Business, told me on the podcast that I needed to listen to this episode. So I did, and I found it incredibly interesting. Let's listen to this clip.
So let's talk about the energy demand equation. The U.S. is forecasted to increase its electricity production capacity from 1 to 2 terawatts by 2040, 15 years from now. During that same period of time, China is going to go from 3 to 8 terawatts. And that China forecast, by the way, excludes any of the Gen 4 nuclear reactors, the new hydroelectric facilities, and the new thorium, or if that ever scales, that they're considering rolling out in addition to what they've already planned to roll out. So in the next 15 years, China is adding 5 Americas in electricity production capacity. And if everything gets automated, factories are automated, AI becomes the great accelerant of the global economy, China is hugely advantaged relative to where we sit today. What do we need to do about it?
Well, this is if you were to ask me what's the thing that keeps me awake at night, this is the issue. And it's so thrilling and refreshing that you understand the scale, the magnitude, and the importance of this, the AI arms race, which is really driven by access to electricity. And China last year brought on 94.5 gigawatts of coal-powered electricity.
So Burgum says what keeps him up at night is that China's developing more energy. And what he cites there is that they built 95 gigawatts of coal. Now, as a point of fact, they commenced construction on 95, but what they actually built was about 30 or 40 gigawatts. But let's look at this. Let's look at what China is actually doing with coal. What Secretary Burgum left out of his discussion on the All In podcast was that China is developing 5 times the amount of renewables as they are compared to coal. So this is from that same Financial Times article that called China the first electrostate. And yes, they are building a lot of coal. And yes, that is concerning for a whole lot of reasons. But make no mistake, they are absolutely developing more renewable energy than they are coal by a long shot. So he said 95 in 2024. Again, those were beginning construction. Depending on whose stats you look at, they completed somewhere between 30 to 50 gigawatts of coal. They built 277 gigawatts of solar in 2024 alone. Now, to put that in perspective, Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world, and we have 180 gigawatts of all resources combined. China built 277 gigawatts of just solar in just 2024. An electrostate indeed. So the administration is clearly hostile to renewables. You hear Secretary Wright talk about this all the time. President Trump talk about it all the time. And Secretary Burgum was asked on this All In podcast, where's our power going to come from? Let's listen to what he had to say.
We got to keep everything going, and we got to go fast on the small modular nuclear. But again, that's really kind of in the 2030s. So that's in our next it's in the important, but it's a little less urgent. We need to fast track all that stuff. Long term, that's where the solutions will likely lie. But in between now, 2025 and 2030, a lot of it's going to come back to LNG, because the fastest thing we can get online for more electricity generation is LNG power plants.
LNG power plants.
LNG power plants. This is his answer to where our power is going to come from. LNG power plants. Folks, LNG power plants aren't a thing. There is no such thing as an LNG power plant. There's some small applications in New England or the upper Midwest where there's not enough pipeline capacity. They might liquefy some natural gas and then use it in the winter when they're in shortages. But that's not the same as an LNG power plant. That's just using natural gas in a different form as a fuel. They're going to regasify it before they use it in the power plant. LNG export terminals take a massive amount of power. There is one in Texas that is connected to the grid. It uses 700 megawatts of power, roughly equal to the city of Waco or the city of Lubbock. LNG doesn't produce power for the grid, it consumes it. So if you want to actually have LNG exports in this country, and you'd like to have them grid connected because their costs are lower and more certain, like the Freeport LNG facility is grid connected, you're going to need a lot of renewable energy. So this is really kind of where I think the administration is going completely off the rails and is just utterly and completely missing the point of what we need to do in the United States to be able to keep up with China. And this is something the guys at the All In podcast covered just a couple of weeks later, the day after the U.S. House passed a bill to end all or most of the clean energy tax credits. Let's listen.
I just want to be honest and say this is not it. And there has to be some meaningful reforms in the Senate version of this thing that gets sent back to the House. So I'll give you an example of one. 81% of the incremental energy that's generated in the United States last year came from private enterprises that were investing in short-term forms of power that have a credit and a transfer market tied to it. This is just the financial machinery. This is how Blackstone and Goldman Sachs and Brookfield and all of these big players move tens and hundreds of billions of dollars around. They changed those rules at the 11th hour. What is the impact of that? Elon foreshadowed it. Nick, maybe you can show the headline of the article. He said, we could be running into a power capacity issue by mid next year. Now, if we knew that, why would we take the short-term incentive away to generate more electrons?
So there you heard a Trump supporter talking to other Trump supporters, talking about how the bill that just moved through the House will take away the ability for private capital to invest in power capacity in the United States of America when we were already going to be in a capacity crunch. This makes no sense. We are heading for an economic catastrophe if the House version of that bill passes. Forget about AI revolution or powering robotics or any of these pie in the sky things that, and I don't mean to use this word derisively, but the tech bros, which I think the all-in guys safely can be called, all of those dreams, those futuristic, techno-optimist dreams, done. Over. There is no way to power what we need in this country, even for what we've got already and just sort of the general growth from industrial electrification and transportation electrification. Forget about all this other stuff if that bill were to go into place. But they went further.
But look, I don't like America's fiscal picture at all. But what if the AI and robotics revolution plays out in the most optimistic way over the next decade and is massively deflationary, and we get basically AI-powered robots expanding the economy massively?
You need power for that.
I get that, and we need to do power generation for sure. But my point is just, what if the new technology provides an answer to
I
the
think it
fiscal
can.
situation that's not currently on the table.
I think it
So
can.
this is my
but
point is Washington's not going to embrace.
I understand, but you're going to have brownouts and blackouts of average human homes to do that? No, you shouldn't have to make these decisions. Those are dumb trade-offs.
You're not going to be able to solve the power generation problem in a reconciliation bill.
You can't solve all of America's energy problems in a reconciliation bill, but you know what you can do in a reconciliation bill? You can make America's problems a whole lot worse. And that is what the bill that passed the U.S. House would do. So they continued on with this conversation later. They went through a whole lot of other topics, but I want to fast forward to the very end of their hour and a half. It starts at like an hour and 23 minutes in, and I do encourage you to listen to the whole thing. But I want you to hear this part in particular because I think this is really the key to the whole thing. We're a country with $38 trillion in debt. Our bonds are being sold at a much higher interest rate, which means that the estimates of the deficit additions from the quote unquote big beautiful bill that are the estimates are at $3 trillion. That's at a 3.5% interest rate. This is something they covered on the All In podcast. If it goes up to 5%, you're adding $8 trillion to the deficit. We absolutely have to have economic growth in this country to be able to deal with that debt, because the alternative is austerity. So they're going to talk about this at this point. So let's hear what they had to say about the potential to maybe grow our way out of this, and what is the limiting factor for that kind of growth.
Given the amazing advances that you see coming with CRISPR, biotech, but also AI, robotics, what are the odds that we can grow our way out of this fiscal problem?
Yeah. I'll be honest. I think the limiting factor, so the CRISPR side is going to have profound effects in longevity, human health, and food abundance. So those are, I think about abundance in 4 ways. One is abundance of food or calories. One is in abundance of labor through automation. One is in abundance of lifespan or longevity. And one is an abundance of what I think is the most important and gating factor, which is energy, which leads to everything else. So you can't have the labor savings without the energy and the productivity improvements without the energy. So the thing I do watch the most, Sachs, and that I do think, you and I have talked about this, that I do think is the critical linchpin for all of those other points of abundance being unleashed is the energy equation. And this is where I look very clearly and plainly at what China's doing versus where we're at today. We've got stated intentions, but the actions are where we're still, we got to start showing up. That's it.
But let's assume that we have enough power. I mean, my point's really
problem.
about...
Yeah, if we have enough power, the $38 trillion of debt doesn't matter.
Really? You're saying that in a...
No, I'm very serious way. Yeah.
But that's a pretty important conclusion, because if that's true, and we can grow our way out of this problem, then that's an alternative to having this austerity approach where there's for which there's no political will.
Energy is the key limiting factor, the key gating item more than anything else. So David Friedberg has done a lot of different things in his career. He thinks about a lot of different things. They were just talking earlier about CRISPR and gene editing. Of all these things, energy is the one that really could make the biggest difference. And as David Sachs said, well, that's a pretty important conclusion. Yes, that is a very, very important conclusion. And this is why it is so key that the Senate fix the mess that the House sent them. Because if you limit that energy production, you are limiting everything else in the economy. So just after that, and again, I do encourage you to listen to that whole conversation on energy in the last 7 or 8 minutes of that particular episode of the All In podcast. It's linked there, obviously, in the show notes. Listen to the whole thing because they go into it more and get into the fact that China is adding a 0.5 terawatt or so of power every single year, while we in the United States are piddling away with literally an order of magnitude, more than an order of magnitude less power generation being added. Again, 277 gigawatts worth of solar added in China in 1 year. The entire generating capacity of the United States across all energy sources is about 1,200, 1,300 terawatts. they put in 277 just of solar just in 1 year. They are kicking our ass, and it's not close. We are getting demolished in this race right now. So are we going to need some more gas generation? Sure. They're not going to be LNG power plants. There is no such thing. But we are going to power LNG with the grid. And we're going to power AI with the grid. And we're going to power oil and gas fracking operations and desalination and robotics. And you could go transportation, heat, industrial activity. All of it is going to take massive amounts of power generation. So you have a choice. A lot of folks on the right in the Trump world are saying all natural gas. We want an all natural gas grid. I see this in my comments in LinkedIn all the time. Give me a 100% gas grid with a 20% margin. That would be phenomenally expensive. Absurdly expensive. And by the way, it would not be a very reliable grid because we have seen during Winter Storm Uri, during Winter Storm Elliott, just a couple of days ago from when I'm recording, there were outages in New Orleans. It was actually a nuclear plant that went down, but they've only got 2 or 3% wind and solar. They had 100,000 people on rotating outages. You can integrate renewables into a grid in a way that makes the grid more reliable. 100% gas grid is not more reliable. It is far more expensive. And in a lot of key ways, it's less reliable because you have what you call correlated risk, right? It's just like if you're an investor, you don't invest in one stock because now you have all this correlated risk. One thing goes wrong with that company, you've lost all your money, right? You diversify. You put your eggs in different baskets because every single generating source has some weakness and some strengths. So you use the strengths and you try to mitigate against the weaknesses. But that's one vision. You could, I guess, try to build an entirely gas grid. You can't get the gas turbines right now, right? And because you want to export gas overseas, you have a policy that is specifically going to drive up the cost of gas while you want to power your whole system with gas. So explain to me how that's going to work. Obviously, the more sensible solution is to have a mix of different generating resources, including gas, but developing advanced nuclear, getting geothermal into place as quickly as possible, and using what we have right now, which is very low cost wind, solar, and storage, and demand side solutions, distributed energy resources, energy efficiency, demand response. And by energy efficiency, right, we're talking about reducing during those peaks. We want people to use more energy. Using more energy is a good thing. Austerity, when you're talking about budgets or you're talking about energy use, is not a good thing. Not the discussion we want to be having. We want to be having an abundance discussion. If you want to have an abundance discussion, you're going to need the renewable power. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please check out DougLewin.com. Subscribe to the Texas Energy Empowered newsletter. Subscribe to the Energy Capital podcast. Please consider becoming a paid subscriber. It really helps support what we do. And I will continue to cover, as long as the reconciliation bill is being discussed, what is going on in the Senate, because I really do think this is key. And make no mistake, this is not a renewable energy issue. It's not only a renewable energy issue. Certainly it affects renewable energy. But what we're really talking about is the future of the United States economy, the future of prosperity and abundance in this country, and whether or not we will be able to compete against China. And if the Senate passes the House's version, we have just taken what is already a lead China has on us, given all the power capacity that they've added, given all the ability they're going to have to power the AI revolution already. We have an advantage clearly on AI. They have an advantage on power, and we would be not tapping the brakes, slamming the brakes for the next several years while they're continuing to accelerate, extending their lead. This would be a disaster for the United States of America, and I really hope the Senate understands that. We'll know soon enough, and I'll be covering it at the Texas Energy Empower newsletter and at the Energy Capital podcast. Thanks for listening.